going to spend the next 20 minutes just talking to you a little bit about driving value out of AI, basically. So this is me. The QR code there will be actually out on our stand later on today, but if you want to connect with me, please come and talk to us after as well. So this QR code is available and also on my badge, so please reach out afterwards. It'd be good to talk to you if any of the content we're going to talk about today is of any interest and you want to have any follow-up conversations. So what am I going to talk to you about today? So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of Advania. If anyone hasn't met us before, doesn't know anything about us, we have changed name a couple of times, so it's quite difficult to keep up with what it might have been called a couple of years ago. You may know us from our old Content and Code and Content and Cloud days, but since we joined the Advania group. So then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing with a lot of our customers from an AI perspective. And not so much about technology, more about how we're working with customers to ultimately get the most amount of value out as possible and what we feel is a good approach to ultimately get the best results possible out of the investment you're going to make in whatever AI tool. And we're going to specifically talk about the Microsoft variants of tools today, because that's what we're all known for. And then I'm going to give you a few examples from some of the customers we've spoken to, some of the things they've asked us to help them with, and some of the outcomes we've got from that. So hopefully that'll give you a bit of an idea as to how we've helped them and how we've used the technology and how we've used our approach to help them out. So let's get going. So Advania, we have grown, as I say, over a number of acquisitions. I've actually only recently joined earlier in the year, so it's been Advania since I've been there. But even since I joined back in June, we've made 2 acquisitions, and that's, we are growing. We are looking to change what we do. We've historically been known as a Microsoft partner. Now we've built a huge MSP capability. We've got a wide breadth of design, delivery, and support capability across the entire Microsoft portfolio. But the one thing we're now trying to do with the recent acquisitions of Servium and CCS Media, one, it allows us to now be the 11th largest reseller in the UK, and now, touching near £500 million from a revenue perspective. The great thing, it gives us a more wider capability from a portfolio perspective, because we've been very services focused and not very focused on product. So the addition of Servium and CCS will give us a lot of additional capability from a product perspective. So that gives us a really good fit, really similar organisation. So we're really excited about what we can achieve as Advania UK. Out of interest, any CCS customers here? Cool, okay, it'd be great to come and maybe talk to you afterwards. So, AI, it's a great opportunity. We are seeing a huge amount of activity in the market, and that's only going to get bigger. So, here's some statistic data that I pulled. There's a number of them, but ultimately it's growing exponentially as in the coming years. So there's a lot of opportunity. We are seeing a ton of focus, specifically from Microsoft. If anyone has been watching Ignite this week, they're reiterating their continued investment, their continued focus. I think in reality, if you speak to Microsoft, actually, they're a little bit behind where they thought they were going to be. There was a big push from their sellers. It's not necessarily all realised yet, because actually it's quite a long investment from you to start to realise that benefit. It's not something that you can necessarily realise immediately. So we will continue to invest. Ultimately, there's a huge opportunity out there that we want to try and support. We want to try and support our customers. And it's not new. It's been around for a while. It's just been called something different. Right back to Alan Turing times, that's ultimately AI. We're automating something that a human could do using a machine, at its very basic level. And it's been through a number of iterations, and we're now, ultimately, our main focus is around generative AI and the large language models, which provide us the ability to interact with it completely differently than before. So, I always use the example of, everyone uses Google, or most people use Google, and you have to search in a specific way to get the best results. Whereas now with a large language model, you talk to it just as you would talk to a colleague or talk to a person, about how you create that prompt to try and search through the data or search through the sources you've got available to ultimately get the best outcome possible. And, it's about efficiencies, it's about saving time, it's about surfacing data that maybe you don't necessarily have access to or you didn't know you had access to as quickly as possible. And ultimately, it's efficiencies and time saved is the large proportion of the use case as to why people are looking at AI technology. And when you start to look at some of the larger use cases where you've got a lot of manual tasks, you've maybe got people doing loads of manual repetitive tasks. A lot of that can be freed up with automation, and then you can use that time better served elsewhere. So as I say, it's been around for a long time. It's not particularly new. It'll be called something new next year, I'm sure. Microsoft, we've already heard that they're potentially rebranding what they call Copilot to Intelligence, I think is the rumour. So who knows? We'll have to just try and keep up to what they want to call it this year. As far as Advania is concerned, AI sits in a number of our product areas. I won't go through all of them. I'm going to talk to a lot of you today about Copilot, specific example. Then I'll talk a little bit about some of the activity we've had from a Power Platform perspective. And that links quite closely into things like SharePoint. We have an additional layer from a SharePoint perspective. We have our own product called Fresh, which provides a greater level of customization and flexibility over and above the native SharePoint capability. Back in our content and code, content and cloud days, that's what we were known for, providing the ability to add a load of rich content over and above what was a relatively vanilla, SharePoint capability. If you wanted to make it look nice, you wanted to add some automation, that required a fair bit of dev and a fair bit of activity. Now, with the ability to templatize a lot of this through our Fresh product, that gives us a huge amount of extra capability and simplifies and reduces the cost to deploy those intranets and search capability in organizations. And a lot of this is underpinned, especially when we start to go out to things like Copilot Studio with Azure AI and all the open AI capability that exists to drive and automate a lot of the activity that is fronted through the likes of Copilot or Copilot Studio as an example. So Copilot itself, the key thing here is around, we have seen a lot of people use the free version that comes with Windows. They start to see what it can do. They've also used OpenAI version of private ChatGPT, also ChatGPT, and they can see what they're able to do. But what that's not able to do is necessarily surface that data from their own internal information. So anything that's stored in the 365 tenant as an example. So the thing that we do is we want to focus on the users, because actually the way we go about trying to realize value from Copilot is understanding the use cases across the business. So one of the things that we focus on is ensuring that we engage a good number of people in your organization and a good representation across your organization. What we have seen in some of the really early Copilot pilots is that they give it out to all the senior execs. They give it out to PAs and EAs because they think they're the people that will get value from it. In reality, that's completely the wrong people to share it to. Execs most probably don't have the time to use it. EAs and PAs who are managing people, actually, right now, Copilot can only look at their data. It can't look at people that they manage or look after. So those, what they would expect it to be as default use case actually isn't particularly valuable. So we spend a lot of time, and I'll talk you through a little bit about, it's predominantly a two-stage process. So we go through, firstly, a discovery phase, secondly, a pilot phase. Now, the reason why we do this also is these are activities, if you are of a certain size and you're already consuming certain Microsoft products, these are fully funded by Microsoft. So we can support you in these discovery and pilot activities at no cost to you. We will put a business case in for you. We will justify why we feel that you are eligible for funding. If it's secure, then we'll manage and run all of these for you, all fully funded by Microsoft. So to give you an indication as to what that looks like from an investment perspective, this particular activity here is about a 3.5, 4 day of effort. It's most probably over a longer period of time than that. This is really about getting in your organization, understanding the structure, getting a high-level view as to what each of your business areas do, what's a day in the life of the users within those departments. We'll then help you with that activity to try and identify, well, this is what we think is an appropriate set of pilot users. And as a rule of thumb, if you're thinking of a 1,000-user organization and you're trying to deploy to all of those, we would recommend you start at about 10%. That's most probably a good number to go for from a pilot perspective. So we'll work with you. We'll make sure that your environment is ready. So things like security is usually a big consideration, because Copilot, once you start searching that data, is going to surface things that you most probably didn't know you have access to. because you didn't find it. It was buried 17 levels down in a SharePoint folder somewhere or a OneDrive folder. Well, Copilot will find that really, really quickly. So quite often we spend some time. That's usually an area for which customers are concerned about. Okay, well, I'm worried that people are going to access something that maybe they shouldn't have access to. One thing to know is that Copilot doesn't break any of the security boundaries you've already deployed. It takes into account everything you've previously configured. What it doesn't take into account is the fact that if you've poorly configured it, it's going to surface that. So we spend quite a bit of time making sure your environment is ready to be able to kick off this pilot, because the next activity, discovery, the next activity is going to be a pilot. We're going to be deploying licenses to people. And then at the end of this process, what we like to do is try to help you by saying, right, based on what you've got in your environment, based on what we've learned about you already, this is what we believe to be the use case and the business case that will ultimately try and drive and allow you to secure additional investment to deploy it to more users. Hopefully the 1,000 that we talked about, or maybe somewhere in the middle. And the most important thing is that we set what we feel we can achieve, and then ultimately we want to move into a pilot, into a lot more detail to be able to prove that. And we start with a very basic business case in that first instance, and then we want to get to a more detailed business case out the back of it. Because what we're going to do is we'll get much closer to your users. We will make sure we're creating what we call the Champions Network. And the reason for that is because once users start using it, once they start learning what they can value they can get from it, once they start writing prompts and realizing, okay, I'm getting some pretty good results here, surprisingly, they don't tend to share them with people. They're like, I'll just keep that, I won't tell anybody. But we encourage them to share them, because actually, once you start seeing people get value, people start to think, okay, well, I've got something quite similar to that. I can mostly do something quite similar and just tweak it slightly to get what I want. So we encourage that communication. We encourage the collaboration and almost gamifying it a little bit, because actually, if they're seeing one department, well, they've got 10 users using it, that's a bit of a competition. They go, well, I'll spend a bit of time. I'll put 30 minutes out of my day to have a quick look and actually spend some time and understand it. And we'll be constantly feeding them with training material. We'll be feeding them and hosting events that helps you really understand what each of the features do and what you can get from it, because they're not all the same. If you look across the portfolio today, Outlook is mostly really feature-rich. Excel, not so much, but it's coming. It's continually evolving. So it's important they understand what you can do in each of these apps and what the capability is and how you go about making the best use of them. And then once we've deployed it to users, and once we've allowed them to play with it for a while, so we'll work with you, but let's ordinarily say about a month, we then make a point of circling back to them and say, right, we sat with you right at the beginning. You told us this is what you thought you would use it for. What happened? Now, what's your experience? How did it work? What did you really get? So we do post-pilot interviews where we capture lots of data. What was good? What was bad? What you felt the training was like. Did you have too much, too little? We then look at, there's a ton of metrics and ton of telemetry data that sits in the tenant that shows you who's using what, where they're using it, what value they're getting. All of that feeds together to ultimately help us give you a more detailed business case that says, right, we send it to the legal department and we can really see value here. We send it to the operations department and actually there's 20 users, 2 of them used it. And based on the interviews, they've realised actually half the stuff they need to do, they'd rather do it with a third-party application or do it through a different way. So actually, going forward, we would mostly recommend not deploying to that department, because they're not going to realise the value. They can do some meeting summaries, they can do some basic search, but actually that's not really going to drive a ton of value when you're paying about £25 per user per month. So that will put you in a much better position to then ultimately, hopefully, secure budget to deploy to more users. And it's not shown on here, but the one thing that is really important is that when you do go to a future deployment and you do start to roll out to more users, it's important that we continue to support you. So we'll make sure we're talking to you every quarter. One, we want to make sure that we tell you about all the new features, because no one ever looks at the release notes. No one ever looks at all the documents that says what's new, it's coming. We simplify that. We summarize what we feel is relevant for you, because we understand you as a business. We know what's going to work. We know what bits aren't relevant. So we'll make sure we're continuing to communicate that with you. And then we'll also make sure we're doing continual training, because We do promptathons and various things that go, well, actually, I'm not really too sure. I'm not really getting what I want. So it's important that we continue to support you on a quarterly basis to make sure that you realise the value. Because we've seen from the stats, you see a big spike of activity while there's some excitement, and then it starts to diminish over time. And ultimately, we want to make sure that that doesn't diminish as much as possible. We want to either keep that flat or make sure we're still seeing the growth, still seeing the value for the investment that you've made. And it's continually evolving, as I said before, and I've left the last one out here. And as you mature your usage, you're moving from, fixing standalone tasks on the left-hand side to fully automated on the right-hand side. And actually, I've greyed out the one on the right because Copilot Agents sort of wasn't available. It is technically available now. I would argue they're still not fully ready, but now you can already get automation capability within the Copilot 365 suite of products. So you're already getting, if you've heard of Copilot Studio, which is basically the ability to create your own Copilot yourself to do a very specific task, you're already getting that capability within Copilot 365, in theory for free, because if you were doing Studio, you have to pay credits, and you have to use Azure AI credits to use that. So they're now merging some of that capability to be able to automate some of the things natively within 365. So the lines are getting blurred. It's capability all the time, and as I say, if you look at Ignite, there's a ton of new features coming. So it's something you need to keep on top of and make sure you try and work out what other benefit you can get from it. And here's an example. So this is a legal firm that we've worked with and actually took a very different approach to what we've seen in a lot of our Copilot pilots. Most people, I'm going to spend some money. I want to see a return on revenue or increased customers. I want something really tangible. This law firm, law firms, they charge quite a bit. They charge per 6 minutes. They're not usually worrying about money too much if they're successful. These actually were very much about well-being of their people. They're overworked. They're always doing really, really long hours. They were trying to find a way to be able to give them something back. So can they remove some of these repetitive tasks they're doing, especially in some of the more admin functions, and do those with Copilot and then utilize that time separately? So it's quite a different approach. They were able to have a huge increase in productivity and let's say 67% of well-being from what we measured. So quite a different. They did actually get some tangible benefit because we saw that their fee earners were able to manage more customers. So they did get tangible benefits, but that wasn't their focus. So that's quite different to what we've seen on a majority of our Copilot use cases. And you've heard me mention about Copilot Studio before. So this is ultimately, Copilot 365 is quite rigid in what it can provide. You can't customize it. It's what you get out of the box. You get new features all the time, but one thing you may want to do is you want to use AI capability, but you want to use it for a very specific use case. So quite often, as part of our Copilot engagements, we'll go through a use case and say, yeah, it would really help me if I could sort of do this with it. And we go, we can't, but actually, Studio could help you to do that. So a good example here is we were working with a financial service organisation in the UK. We're rolling out 365. We went and spoke to the GRC risk department. They said, we've got a really horrible, complicated activity we have to do every single year. We've got loads of policy documents that we're responsible for making sure they're up to date. We have a controls document that we have to look at and make sure and score all of our policies every single time, and we have to be comfortable that they've been applied appropriately. And it's basically a 20-day job for a team of people to sit there and go through these policies. Pretty boring, big, huge, horrible PDF documents. And they were going to buy an additional module as part of one of the SaaS applications that they currently use to do it for them. And that was going to cost them about £1 million, something like that, for that upgrade. And they said, don't really want to spend that. Let's see if we can fix it some other way. So they said, I went to a few of their partners, and all their partners came back and said, we'll just throw some bodies at it, offshore resources, really cheap. We can just turn the handle. We can do it every year, massively save you a load of money. We're like, no, we think we can do that with technology. So we've basically changed what was ultimately like a 2-month process, basically, using Copilot Studio and automating and creating complex prompts, just basically do manually what all those people were doing, cross-referencing documents, create a scorecard, and we can now do that in 2 hours. And they can repeat that as many times as they want throughout the year. They can repeat it monthly. So that was only a 20-day engagement for our team to do the pilot, do the discovery, and create that custom Copilot. So a huge amount of benefit to them. And also they're now using that across the other departments because the base work that we did to create that model and create that framework, we already now understand the data model, we understand those policy documents. We can reuse that in other areas that are also referencing the same document. So a huge amount of benefit from a relatively small project and avoided them having to buy additional software. They could utilize what they've already got. So huge use case there. Secondly, you've got, I talked about ChatGPT, the public version. You can also create your own version. So on your intranet, you can publish your own private ChatGPT. We've got our own, it's called IDA. I can't remember why it was called IDA. There was a poll that went out and everyone had to choose what it was called. But this allows us to have our own intranet search capability that searches on very specific data sources. So this doesn't go out to the internet. You can switch it. It's capable to switch between the two. But we have a number of authoritative documents within our business. So the BMS system, for instance, which holds all our policies. Historically, you would have gone onto our fresh SharePoint, searched, and you would have got some reasonably good results. Now, with the private ChatGPT capability, we've got a huge amount of additional value we can get because we've customized it specifically within our environment, and it references our data that we've specified, and we can pick and choose as to what sources it looks at. So I haven't got a demo today, but you see in the top right-hand corner there, you've got Search, SharePoint, and Teams. There's a list of different data sources within our organization you can use for very specific things. So for instance, the most recent one we've added is our project management practice. They've got a big guide of things, how to manage a project, what you need to do, all the governance capability, all the billing activity you need to do. That's all now serviced in that document. If anybody comes and joins a business and wants to understand how I raise a project, how I engage the PMO to get some resources, just type it in here and it tells them exactly what they need to do. You don't need to read a 50-page document to try and find it. So again, another way of surfacing data that you've got in your organization through a much better interface, and it allows you to access that data very, very quickly. And this is an example of a customer. So this is a fairly large critical infrastructure project within the UK. They are working with hundreds of different partners it's a railway project, you may know who it is. They've got a ton of data they capture every single day, but they have a responsibility, obviously, from a health and safety perspective for all the sites and all the activities. It was impossible for them to be able to, if somebody was to make a claim that I dropped something on my foot or something happened to me, it was very difficult for them to search all of their data sources to be able to find evidence of that incident. So we basically provide them the ability to be able to aggregate all of those data sources into a single place, so they can search it in one particular place and surface all that information. So we've massively, let's say 15 data sources. So we've been able to allow them to search a huge amount of data that would have potentially taken them weeks and months to go trawl through tons and tons of information to try and find out whether there was an incident related to that particular claim that somebody was making. So again, huge amount of automation and efficiency added there, but again, a relatively less, I think that was a 30-something day project to do the discovery and create the prompt and build the environment to be able to surface that information really quickly. Then we talk about Power BI. There's a huge amount of capability within Power BI. I'm not going to go into a huge amount because there's tons of different capabilities in here. But the one thing that we are seeing with people looking to improve the application development, people wanting to move to a low-code, no-code basis in their environments, the one problem it creates is it's very easy to create an app. And you can very quickly get a proliferation of apps across your organization. So we had this particular customer, it's an energy customer of ours, who has allowed their users to deploy loads of applications, and it was really massively out of control. So one of the things that we've done for them is we've created a center of excellence to deploy and manage the creation of these applications to a particular structure. It allows us to be able to make sure that we've got real control over the applications that are being delivered. They're all being developed to produce to a standard methodology. And now they are much more comfortable that they've removed that proliferation and anarchy of applications that are out there in the estate to a much more controlled environment. So, you can get much better control. We can make sure there's no overlap with any existing systems they've got deployed, and the environment is in a much better place now. Last couple of slides. So this is just a stat I put, I think it was a Microsoft one actually, and I was going to use this as a bit of an opportunity to say, specifically on a Copilot perspective, can I get a show of hands of who's deployed Copilot in their environment? Okay, cool. And the reason I ask that is because actually, as part of this event, we're going to be offering people, if you're interested in what I talked about from a Copilot perspective earlier, we're offering free sessions to talk to our team, to consult with you, do a bit of a discovery exercise, talk you through what we see as a value. There's a QR code on the next slide here. So scan that QR code. That's also on our stand. So if you don't happen to capture it here, come to our stand. There's a little QR code on there. There's a little form you need to fill in, give your details, and ultimately that will then send that to us, and we'll make contact with you and arrange for one of either my team or one of the AI team to come and talk to you and take that opportunity further. So hopefully what I said today is interesting. If there's anything you want to talk to me afterwards about specific Copilot, I'll be on the stand, and please take us up on our offer, and we'd love to help you out. Thank you very much.